Yo guys, how are you doing? Welcome back to Rule of Two Review. So, there's not a lot of news to talk about right now in the world of gaming, or the world of Nintendo specifically. So, what I realized that I wanted to do was kind of revisit a topic that was sparked in my brain when discussing some different news a couple of weeks ago. The news of the previous video initially had to do with some of the reports and rumors that do still currently exist about Sony possibly already planning to release the PlayStation 5, which still sounds so awkward to say. It does not roll off my tongue very comfortably. Like, PlayStation 5? PS5? Are we really already in a world where we're talking about the fifth PlayStation console? Apparently we are, because these rumors, and apparently a lot of people with inside info, have said behind closed doors that it is something that Sony is already working on, which to a degree it sort of makes sense for them to already be working on their next console. I guess I would believe that. But part of this rumor, and what I was discussing even a week or two ago now, was the rumor being put out there that they're looking at releasing it possibly in 2018 or even 2019. Very famously in this past month, Michael Pachter, everyone's favorite video game analyst who never says anything controversial, has also been stating that he firmly believes Sony will be releasing the PlayStation 5, the PS5, whatever the thing turns out to be, which would be a PlayStation 5, in 2019. That's his guess, full stop. He put it out there, that's what he thinks. And so I discussed it. I talked about that rumor, the idea of what it might mean for Sony to be doing it, the fact that I'm expecting the next generation to start far, far later than that. And while discussing it, an idea that popped into my head while talking about it was the concept of whether or not possibly Microsoft and the Xbox One X would be maybe coercing Sony into making such a drastic move as to release the PS5 in 2018 or 2019, because they might be semi-intimidated by what Microsoft is trying to do with the One X. Now, that's the gist of what I want to get to today, but what should be noted is that, for what it's worth, I don't really believe that. I felt that a couple of weeks ago on that video, and I still feel this today. At the end of the day, my full opinion, my gut feeling, I should say, is that I don't expect Sony to release their PlayStation 5 even as early in 2019. My personal theory is after that 2020 at the earliest. I'm hoping for around 2021. I want a nice long 7 or 8 years out of our consoles, just like we had the previous generation. I thought that that worked quite well. But, you know, at this point, with this being the rumor, people talking about, oh, I think 2019 is when we're going to see the PlayStation 5, and Sony is planning on doing that, I felt that it was worth it for me to explore the other side of the argument. It may not be my theory or opinion, it may not be what I expect to happen, but I'm willing to kind of look outside of my own box, and let's kind of pretend for a little bit today that Sony is planning on releasing the PS5 as early as 2018 or 2019. So considering that, regardless of my opinion, it is a possibility that Sony decides to release the PS5 as early as 2019. If that's the case, why would they be considering doing so when, in my opinion and a lot of people's opinion, we're not quite yet ready to do so? The biggest thing for me is possibly the Xbox One, like I discussed. I think that there's really two possible outcomes here. One is the Xbox One X, the other is the Nintendo Switch. I feel like one of the things that might be coercing Sony, like I said before, into doing something like this would be stiff competition from Nintendo's current brand new console, the Switch, and the upcoming threat, if we want to call it a threat, of the Xbox One X. And it's a little bit dicey when you start going down this line of thinking, because we don't quite yet know if the Xbox One X is going to make a huge splash. To be fair, Microsoft spent some time talking about it at E3. They didn't make a huge to-do about it, but they did talk about it for the first 20 minutes or so. I'm someone who feel like, even though I'm not interested in it and it doesn't make me want to replace my Xbox One with the One X, I think that their messaging and the way they've presented it in that first 20 minutes, even though I don't like tech speak and specs talk and all that stuff, I still thought that they did a fairly good job with it. Overall, I was like, okay, you showed what it is. I totally understand it's an Xbox One family console, and that's what you're going to do. The most powerful console, $500 you're going to put it out there. But beyond that, it's not like it really has a lot of people buzzing and talking about the next big hot thing from Microsoft, the Xbox One X. So why would that be something that might potentially be intimidating to Sony and help convince Sony to release their next console sooner than later? To me, the only thing I could possibly see is Sony might feel threatened by the power of the console. if we looked at the immediate arms race between Sony and Microsoft, not yet talking about Nintendo and how they fit into this whole thing, the power and the smoothness of performance of games is one of the biggest boons Sony has had over Microsoft and the Xbox One. And I think that's one of the things that's helped the PlayStation 4 be so successful and seen in the eyes of the gamer as the better and more efficient console. And to be fair, even though I prefer my Xbox One as a gaming experience over my PlayStation 4, that is true. The PlayStation 4 is more capable than the Xbox One, and the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One S, I'm going to admit I don't 100% know how they break down in terms of what they allow gaming to do. I do know there's talk about, oh, the 4K Blu-ray player in the Xbox One S, and the PS4 Pro doesn't do that. I think that that's a shame, and that is what it is, but I don't want to talk about Blu-ray players in 4K. I'm talking about just the gaming experiences. I mean, maybe the PS4 Pro is probably still the more powerful console overall to the One S. I think that that is the case. And I think back to when these consoles first launched in 2013 and throughout the whole first year in 2014, man, the big talk of the town at that time, if you guys can remember, was how every game that came out for both consoles ran at a better resolution and a better frame rate on the PlayStation 4 than the Xbox One. The Xbox One was getting all these weird, like, 920p, 914, 860p weird resolutions, and Tomb Raider came out and was 60 frames per second on the PS4, and it was only 30 frames per second on the Xbox One, and it was this big thing of this is why the PS4, this is why PlayStation took back the top spot this generation over Microsoft, because they built a more powerful console, and the gamer just gravitated towards that. The multi-platform games were looking and running and performing and selling better on the PlayStation 4. And obviously that, among many other things, in my opinion, a better exclusive library of games, the PlayStation 4 has been outselling and outpacing the Xbox One ever since they launched. Now Microsoft comes along with this threat of the most powerful console ever made. Everyone who really understands what all of the technical jargon that goes into consoles and PCs mean has confirmed that yes, everything that Microsoft has shown us and told us about what's in the Xbox One X absolutely is the most powerful console ever and will trounce effectively what even the PS4 Pro does. And so maybe, if Sony is really considering releasing the PS5 this early, as early as next year or 2019, maybe they're just threatened by the fact that, oh my gosh, when we finally had the most powerful console on the market again, it helped us be successful and it helped us outperform our competition and it's helped our brand grow. And now maybe Microsoft, with all of its money and all of its marketing and all of its power, and suddenly comes out with this new console and it is all of a sudden more powerful than our machine. Is that going to turn the tides? Is that going to make us look like the weaker guys, the smaller guys, the guys that just can't keep up with that old Xbox brand? You want the true ultimate gaming experience? You go with Xbox, PS4 is garbage. Maybe they're worried of that mindset starting to float out there. And I mean, I think that they really don't need to be worried about that, but if in fact we live in a world where this was true, I could see why they would think that. They wouldn't necessarily be entirely wrong. But I do have to say, I still don't ultimately think the One X is going to make this impact. Even if Sony was somewhat intimidated by them and was like, we got to get a new machine out, the PS4 Pro. I mean, we thought that was going to do its job, but the One S came out and was pretty comparable, and now the One X is going to come out and be even better, and we're going to get totally screwed. We got to get to our next thing fast. If that's what they're doing, I still don't think the One X is going to make that big of a splash. And then if we bring it back to Nintendo and the Switch, there's a different sort of mindset happening there, I think, when you look at what Nintendo is doing. Because there is an argument to be had of how much of a direct competition is Nintendo and the Switch to Sony and to Microsoft. And I tell you what, you can ask 10 different people this question, and you're going to get almost 10 different answers of whether or not Nintendo and Sony and Microsoft all compete, or if Nintendo's in their own camp and it's just Microsoft and Sony, or if the Switch is meant to be competition for them, or if it's only supposed to be a handheld and it's competition for the Vita and the 3DS, and Nintendo doesn't care about graphics, so they're not trying to compete in the same way, but they are still competitors because they're all making home consoles. I mean, everyone's going to have a different way to look at it. My personal perspective, at the end of the day, at the most surface level, they're all competitors. They're all even-keel players in the same industry. They are the three home console manufacturers. Yes, the Switch is a portable, but let's be honest, guys, it operates as a home console as well. It is a console. They are all peers competing with one another. That being said, I do think that their business models is what starts to kind of stray apart from each other. So yes, there is a case to be said that Nintendo moves to the beat of their own drum. I mean, they've been doing that for many years and multiple generations in a row at this point. And I think sometimes to their hindrance, but overall to their advantage. And it's obviously one of my favorite things about Nintendo. So there is sort of the gray area of they are all competitors and they're all peers, but at the same time, Nintendo sort of moves in a different direction than Sony and Microsoft do. So when you consider Sony is like thinking we have to release a PS5 sooner than later, the PS4 Pro isn't getting it done the way maybe people thought it would, and you have Nintendo come out with this new console slash handheld, whatever we're going to call it, the Nintendo Switch, a great machine, and a machine that is selling like crazy, and is showing all of the naysayers that Nintendo can still do it. Nintendo is never going to be doomed. Never count them out. They will do the unthinkable and the impossible and release this weird machine in a market where people thought handheld gaming was dead, and you can't have a handheld that also operates as a console. And they're selling it out like crazy, and their attach rate to all of their first-party software is insane, and they've got an amazing lineup of games coming, even without full third-party support yet. Hopefully that stuff starts to come soon, and then they're going to further start destroying the competition. So is the Switch something that's possibly convincing Sony to also look at releasing a PlayStation 5 on top of the possible threat of the One X? Maybe. I think that it's not impossible to think that that might be the case. Sony and Nintendo, I think, are more direct competitors than obviously Microsoft and Nintendo, for example. Sony and Nintendo, both Japanese companies, both seeing the same levels of very high success, both in North America, in Europe, and then also in Japan, whereas Microsoft traditionally does not perform in Japan. They do in the United States, in North America, I should say, I'm sorry, and in the UK, they certainly do perform pretty well. And the Xbox One is no slouch. 35 million units sold is nothing to really scoff at. Those are good sales. But really, Sony and Nintendo do kind of feed the same market a little bit, and they appeal to also that Japanese market and that Japanese gamer. So Nintendo doing so well, I think it's silly to completely count them out of the conversation, if in fact Sony's planning on releasing the PlayStation 5 in 2019. Again, that's the strange thing here, is this all just hinders on whether or not Sony is looking at moving this quickly on the next generation, on their 5th PlayStation console. And if that's the case, why would they feel they need to do so soon? You know, it's been discussed a lot over the last year, mostly started with Phil Spencer and Microsoft, this specific conversation, about whether or not the walls of the generations are breaking down, the boundaries that hold generations to the time periods that they are might no longer exist. Part of Microsoft's goal has been to sort of do that and shatter those boundaries that hold our generations together. So, you know, Nintendo can release their 9th gen Switch in 2017. Sony can release their PlayStation 5 in 2019. Microsoft can make their sequel to the Xbox One family of consoles in 2022. And they're all of a sudden, everyone, instead of moving in a pack from one step to the next, all kind of in tandem, everyone's sort of jumping all over the place. And Microsoft sort of started to speak about the idea of it. Nintendo sort of first put it into practice by releasing their 9th generation Switch only 4.5 years after the Wii U came out, in the middle of the PS4 and Xbox One life cycles. But then, of course, you got the PS4 Pro and Xbox One S throwing a weird kink into what those companies are doing, and then the One X is going to be even another level on top of that. And at that point, we start retreading sort of the conversation I had in this initial video about when we might move into the next generation and how totally wacky this 8th/9th generation is that we're in right now. It's all very strange, and it all comes down to what Sony's even doing. And so, bringing it back to the beginning of this video to wrap this up, personally, I don't believe Sony is releasing the PlayStation 5 as early as 2019. Again, it could be possible. This is just my gut feeling. I'm not telling you I have inside info, or I'm trying to spread rumors that says it's not going to happen. I'm just a gamer with a gut feeling, and it tells me 2019 is too early. I don't see Sony doing that. And I really just wanted to have this conversation based on the fact that the rumors are out there. It is a possibility. And for me, it's interesting to think about the other perspective and talk about what this all means. I feel like if Sony was trying to move, as I've talked about in this video, maybe the One X and the Switch, and how well the Switch is performing, and the One X's impending amazing level of power might be something that sort of intimidates Sony into moving quickly on their 5th PlayStation. But I don't really want to see that. I'm hoping to see new consoles start to come from all three of the manufacturers after 2020. That's my personal goal. I'm really comfortable with where this generation is now. We don't need to be changing systems over anytime soon. Hell, I loved the Wii U and was satisfied with it until we got the Switch. I mean, if Nintendo was still releasing games and there was a lot of content to play on the Wii U, I wouldn't have felt like we even needed a new console. Part of the reason I was even ready for the Switch when it came out was because it became clear over a year before it launched that Nintendo had way moved on from the Wii U. There just weren't games, consistently very good games, coming out for the console, and it is what it is. So anyway, I'm going to wrap this up and end this video here. A unique conversation because, again, I kind of spent the whole conversation talking about something I don't really believe in, but I think it's important to explore opinions outside of our own box and our own little bubble of how we feel. So what do you guys think? Do you think the PlayStation 5 is coming that soon? If so, do you think that Microsoft or Nintendo have any influence on Sony feeling like they need to move really quickly into their next generation? They need to move on from the PS4 sooner than, or the PS4 Pro, sorry, sooner than later and get that PS5 out there to people. I don't really want it. Maybe you guys do. Talk about your feelings, talk about your thoughts, your theories, what you think about what I had to say today. I think that's it. So, yeah, thanks as always for tuning in, guys. This is Rob of Rule of Two Review, and as always, I will catch you next time on another video.